I love the Super Robot Wars series, if you couldn't already tell by my collection. And yes, I'm missing Endless Frontier, there's a reason for that. Even if we haven't gotten all the other games, and even if we have to rely on fan translations for older titles, it holds a very special place in my heart. Without it, I likely never would have expressed interest in certain series, like Mazinger, or even enjoy other Gundam titles I never heard of, or saw in Dynasty Warriors Gundam. No other series involving giant robots could even compare for me. The closest was Zone of the Enders, though, well, we're never getting any more because fuck Konami. Even if this video series isn't the most popular on my channel, I hope these reviews have sparked some interest in this series thanks to the 6-year anniversary of my time on YouTube. And now the war heats up like never before, for Super Robot Wars continues. Hello and welcome to the final video on the Super Robot Wars series. Unless I get a 3DS capture card anyway to take a look at the Endless Frontier series. True, there are technically other games in English I could look at, but those also either have a ton of series I am unfamiliar with and thus can't do a decent review. Or there's Moon Dwellers, which again has a lot of story stuff not yet available in the West, and the Wikia isn't always reliable. Yeah, I was wrong about the Monica thing. She's the cousin of Shu. Safine's still best girl, I guess. What an honor. Once again published by Atlus, this game debuted in America only a few months later, as opposed to in Japan where there was a nearly 3-year gap. While heralded as a better game thanks to its story and gameplay, this title also earned the infamous honor of being one of the hardest in SRW history. It's surprising considering how slow and unfriendly earlier titles were, which made me wonder why this was the case. Replaying it, well, let's find out why in this review of Super Robot Taisen, Original Generations 2 on the GameBoy Advance. As you can tell, the base presentation hasn't really changed all that much, as it still uses the same facial portraits and the overall size of the robots is still relatively the same. What has improved is literally everything else. Ditching the metal gray background for a more techno-green was a much better decision, helping the text pop out more. When you try and attack and hover over a unit now, you have percentages to show how likely both attacks will hit, leaving less menus to be opened and closed. And some characters gain new expressions for their character portraits, though this one with Excellen makes me think she is trying to imitate Bugs Bunny. I mean, it kinda makes sense when she offers to dress in a bunny outfit, and yes, there is a lot of merch of that, but good luck finding it. Or at the very least, good luck finding it cheap. Animations are also better and feel faster to boot, relying less on still screens for the mechs. Although I just now noticed the animation for the Huckbind Mark II with the G-Impact cannon, does that count as a strap-on? And to think, I just thought this series only had boob jokes. Some animations are better than others though. While I do love Senger's Allenbell and Elzem, their team attack feels a bit lacking towards the end, which is hilarious if you look for this move anywhere else, it's just so damn good. Speaking of which, in addition to the team attacks from the first game, you can now do at least 4 more depending on which mechs you have, and the game is kind enough to give demonstrations this time with the story. With the exception of the 2 attacks from the first game, though, you can use those right away if you have the characters. And yes, you are seeing 2 robots basically dance an enemy to death. One area kinda took a blow, the music, or rather specific songs. Some like Kyosuke and Ryusei's themes are still excellent, and it's hard for me to point out something I hate, but something like Belletta, it feels a bit lighter than her original version. Here's a comparison. I don't know, I prefer the old theme. It felt a lot cooler than this one, fitting her personality better. This new one feels a bit too light for her, maybe more suited to a cheerful character, and the new one will persist in future games sadly. Other than that, still some good stuff, particularly the enemy themes which are very intimidating. And as a bonus, you can even change the theme music of certain characters to other themes if you don't like them, though your choices are limited. Other improvements are seen with upgrading the units. Customization bonuses are back, but unlike Maso Kaishin, you can choose the bonus upgrade, which is usually upgrading one stat by 10%, or a bonus ability, like adding more attack power, changing terrain specialty to an S for optimal performance, etc. Though considering the balance of money in this game, it might not be worth it in some cases. Some machines even function differently from the previous game, specifically the R-Gun and Gaigan Skundo. In the latter's case, it got upgraded to the Duro, which has much less costly will requirements, negating some of my complaints from the previous review. So say using the beam attack, you don't really have any will requirements at all. The problem with it now is that they took out a certain attack that worked well for hitting foes while moving, so unless it gains a decent amount of will, hitting foes that are farther will be a tad challenging and drain more energy as you try to close in. In the R-Gun's case, it sadly loses its Mill Destroyer ability since the SRX now uses it exclusively for the HTB gun. The replacement attack isn't quite as cool or powerful sadly. Other than that, I still found some joy in using every robot the game gifted to me. And as for those stat weapons, now they actually do damage. It's small as hell, but hey, they are more useful, unless you find a boss immune to them, though not every enemy blocks every single type of these. And if you find yourself with a surplus parts to attach to the mechs, you can now sell them, which finally gives me a reason to use those consumable items for something. Ace bonuses are now improved too, for getting 50 kills now also gets a unique benefit to the pilot. Also, there's something new I don't think is ever quite explained, but this is apparently the game to introduce small benefits if you keep certain characters close to one another, like better accuracy or more damage. The small benefits are handy and help add to some strategy, and you're going to need every benefit you can get your hands on. This also means you need to pay attention more to the story as well, just to know which characters are better off being paired up. Even pilot skills have more options, such as making it easier to dodge attacks at a certain threshold of will. You can also gain the ability to chain attack foes. As long as a character has a weapon with a C next to it and the ability, they can initiate a chain attack, which can hit a certain amount of foes in a line. It's fun to pull off, though I wish this didn't take up a pilot skill. Maybe it could have been balanced out with using more energy for the attack. Still, it's a great answer when enemies try to guard one another to prolong a fight. I also find it a blast to use, like using a smaller version of a map attack to rack up a ton of damage or money. And of course there are less than useful skills, but there's enough here to make me want to use a good majority of them. Support skills are now divided properly between defense and attack, feeling a bit less broken to use compared to the last game. Probably for the best, and it does help keep certain units from taking unnecessary damage as I try to rush through things. So with all these new upgrade options, why is the gameplay harder, you ask? Well, for starters, enemies can have quite a lot of HP, and will be harder to take down without proper weapons and skills being upgraded. Plus, it's harder to dodge and hit foes early on, even with spirit commands. Now, some enemies like Yuki and Carla have a reasonable amount of HP, a bit bigger than some bosses in the first game, but not by an extreme amount. However, the other boss units, well, their HP surpasses the amount of the final boss in the original Generations game. I'm serious. At times like these early in the game, killing them is impossible, especially if they can recover their HP. Your best bet is either reducing their HP by a certain amount, or surviving a certain amount of turns. The latter is likely going to be used more if you haven't invested in good stats or SP recovery. This is made harder since double image returns to more boss units, so having the strike command is necessary. Which brings me to another point. The enemies hit really hard. Even when defending against attacks, I found it all too easy to have my units die to a boss. Here's an example. I was fighting against Axel, who can regenerate a huge amount of HP, so keeping him down was already impossible. I had to shave off a certain amount, so I used one of my tanky units to attack him. It also helped I buffed him up with a ton of money into his defense and HP, and then this happened.
Now, man, stay calm. It's not as bad as it seems.
But sir, those were our tanks!
Holy frickin' crap, this was my best tank unit, and the bosses were shredding through it like how Sengar Zondal should be tearing every enemy up. As the game goes on, I felt less and less comfortable with my units taking on damage, especially from boss units. If I didn't have stuff like SP Regenerate or focus my funding into bulking up the armor, I would have lost my mind. Hell, depending on how a story scenario advances, you'd be screwed too. Like in this one stage where I controlled Aruto, and a bunch of new enemies suddenly showed up on the enemy's turn. Not expecting them to be so close, I couldn't use the focus spirit command to reduce their chances of hitting me, leading to Aruto's machine being turned to scrap and forcing me to restart the stage. And keep in mind, this hard mode run was done during a New Game Plus round, where I got a ton more cash and skill points thanks to the progress made in my last run. This isn't helped with how accuracy is handled, which I feel harms fights the most. Robots I usually love using, like Psybuster, are neutered against certain bosses due to lacking the strike command early on, meaning his attacks are far more likely to miss, even if the will is super high, and would thus either need some good parts, or for someone to have the attuned spirit command, which isn't always available. Fortunately, the game does become more manageable once you get more spirits and upgrading your mechs well. I'm so thankful Masaki's strike command is super cheap in this version. Still, if you let your guard down, the enemy will tear into your units like a freaking shark. The game finds a way to be even harder though. I mean, what I just ranted about, that is manageable, not so much this. There are many stages where you get to use new characters, but lack any menus or time to upgrade them. This is why even on New Game Plus, this game is punishing, since it's not like characters keep their levels, leaving those units to be more susceptible to being killed. Made worse on stages where losing a single ally is an instant game over. The reason the game over is more frustrating here though, is because of those battle masteries. See, if you lose a stage, you lose the chance to get them this time. And if you are a masochist, you can unlock extra difficulty options, though they limit what you can upgrade, like the weapons. And yes, I have heard horror stories about these difficulties. Now, imagine taking on those super enemies without the option to, say, upgrade your weapons. Suddenly this game became very scary to you, didn't it? Now there is some good news. Not every secret relies on battle masteries this time. You still need to know exactly what to do, like getting a certain amount of kills for each character, using only a certain character in a stage, or something more vague involving minor spoilers. But this does take away some pressure from needing to constantly go after the battle masteries. And even then, the game gives you more than enough units to have a kick-ass army ready to tackle the finale. However, because of this, I recommend not trying to go for them in your first playthrough and save it for a New Game Plus. And unlike the previous story route, you only have one route to take, but it will be split into two paths featuring a set of characters, so replaying the game is encouraged to see the rest of the tale. But is the plot even worth it? Well, let's dive into the story section and see how our heroes manage to improve. Before we begin, I should note I will also be looking at the anime of this game as well. Why didn't I do this with the first game? Well, certain visuals are kinda distracting. That and the differences with Game 2 warranted some change given some significant retcons that would later occur in the remake. Also, it gives me an excuse to talk more about certain characters who feel a tad flat in this one. And I couldn't find a copy of the DVD to arrive before the video was done, so I'm sorry for the low quality footage. Mainly because the DVDs are freaking expensive. Then again, just look at the end credits. I mean, it doesn't hide how thirsty it is with some characters even having nipples poking through their uniforms, so, and you're gone. Well, for those remaining, let's look at the plot. The story takes place 6 months after the first game, with everyone trying to help contribute to the Aegis project, a plan to help protect the Earth from future threats. And all of this was made by the president I made fun of in the last review, who gained his position thanks to certain people dying in a certain way, and already being quite popular among the people. Thank you again, Violetta. You truly are the best waifu. If only you were real. Unfortunately, DC remnants are still around and wish to avenge their commander, not quite understanding the message he left, or at least not trusting people within the government to handle the situation. They are kinda right in the latter, as there are forces within wishing to take over the EFA, though I will cover them later. Things are further not helped with a new alien force called the Einst, who have a lot more tentacles in the anime. They are meant to have more of a magical connection due to this dragon tiger robot tied to them, fighting them years ago. Kyosuke and Excellen have very strong ties to the Einst throughout the game too, as a voice only they can hear constantly tries to talk to them, mostly a young girl named Alfimi shrouded in mystery. Speaking of those two, I honestly love them as a couple way more in this game than in the last one, particularly when they both get their upgraded mechs and perform a team attack, as their dialogue feels more in sync with each other and showing their growth. The anime even improves this, by adding some more stuff to their scenes, the extra dialogue feeling just right considering who they both are. It did a much better job than the last game, where the hints of their couple status was only really seen in Kyosuke's route, where he hugged Excellen after saving her from Ingram. Also, the Einst have a habit of having their attacks named in German, as does Rutzel Feinschmecker, aka Elzem. I said I would have an explanation for the fascination of the language by this series. I was lying. I'll at least try to explain why Elzem now has this identity when we get to the spoilers at least. Naturally, not everyone is stupid enough to fall for this, and I think only Lafina was fooled. However, before anything is established in the world we know of, the game truly opens with an unfamiliar setting, with characters Lemon and Axel holding back an army of Gespenst, and the Taisen. Though in this world, the official name is the Gespenst Mark III, which was the original name before it got changed. To spoil things ahead of time, this is an alternate timeline, the Shadow Mirror universe, and Axel's team has the same name for their organization. In this timeline, certain events have changed, with many of the original characters assumed dead, or in the case of Wodan Ymir, implied to have been altered in some way. I'll explain more about him later. We get hints early on with the new character Lamia, and how she interacts with the OG crew while being a spy for the Shadow Mirrors. For example, she notes how the Brandstein family is one of tragedy. Later on, when she's explaining stuff, we find out that Elzem failed to stop the colony from being gassed, causing his entire family to die except for Rai, and then Rai proceeds to die when testing out the Huckbein, as opposed to just losing his hand in the accident. I can only imagine the despair of the poor bastards who never heard of Elzem's glorious theme. There are some other things implied, and all thanks to dialogue I had to look up when certain characters engaged Axel in his first fight in the Soul Gate. From what I can tell, Cybuster was apparently still around, though I don't know what happened to it or the grandson. Luden Zoldark is definitely dead, however, which makes me more curious as to what happened to her. Another key difference is the Arrogators never appeared. Rather, the Inspectors, who I'll get to soon, were the ones to show up first. And given the level of tech they had, capable of rewriting mechs to work for them in a few instances, plus the fact that they want to wipe out all the people of Earth instead of using them, well, it's easier to imagine certain characters died quite easily. This is easier to understand as throughout the game, the Inspectors come close to annihilating some pilots, even pushing Elzem and Sanger back on a few occasions. While there are multiple protagonists in this game who have a lot of focus, the game mostly brings attention to Kyosuke, who is often mistaken for the Kyosuke in the other world, who was known as Beowulf. Unlike in the anime, the Beowulf in the game never has any dialogue, only seeing the intro and mentioned throughout, so he could be about the same as the Kyosuke we all know of. Maybe without a girlfriend, however, since no one recognizes Excellen, save for her last name. And given how the Elpis was gassed, it's possible the EFA is even more corrupt, so they may not be the good guys, or the number of good people has dwindled drastically. The anime takes this a step further, as they try to expand Beowulf's sadistic nature, implying he was the one to kill all of his allies, and very much infected by the Einst given what happens to his Altaisen during the fight against Axel, transforming him into an unstoppable monster. Hell, in the opening of the first episode, he friggin' kills Ryusei and the other SRX pilots in a very brutal fashion. Although what's kinda weird is that Beowulf is never brought back for this game as some final battle, though at least in the GBA version, Einst aren't established in the Shadow Mirror universe, so it kinda makes sense there. He technically appears in both the anime and a mod at this game where Lamia is replaced with a playable Axel. I believe it to be a waste since the story uses the gameplay to tell the story, and notice the coloring here. It implies the Shadow Mirrors are different since the Shadow Mirror models are blue while Kyosuke is red, implying this Kyosuke is one of the bad guys. I'm normally not a fan of retcons, but for this game I can excuse it given the anime and remake are able to improve certain elements, though it's hard to judge the latter since, well, no game in English. For example, there's Axel's huge murder boner in the GBA. His relationship to Beowulf is seen more as a bitter rivalry over Axel having legitimate reasons to hate Kyosuke and him being too much of a monster. Plus he treats Lamia like crap, calling her a puppet even with his dying breath, along with any other cyborg his partner Lemon creates. I am thankful for the rewrite though, since Axel is much more likable and understandable in other titles, though never to a point where he deserves hugs or anything since he is still one of the villains in this game, yearning for a world filled with conflict. It helps that Axel had so little in this game that making the changes were easier to integrate and don't feel intrusive, mostly adjusting the beginning of the game and the dialogue, whereas in the anime, there is some lingering trauma, shown right away when as soon as an injured Axel finds Kyosuke, he immediately tries to attack him, assuming this Kyosuke was exactly the same as the one in his world. and fearful the monster would reappear. In the game, this is different since Axel apparently arrived earlier than his team, somehow, and was apparently present in Game 1 in the background fighting the Irrigators. Again, somehow. But why was this done? Well, likely fan feedback. Remember, a good number of original generation characters were protagonists of their own game at some point, so fans of previous games were likely upset that Axel was not just a villain, but killed off in the game with no redeeming qualities beyond having some good music and a kick-ass mech. Also, I imagine the innocent smile he has helped things, and those mesmerizing eyes. But yeah, I'm more understanding to making the changes to Axel given this reason. Think of it this way, when the DC rebooted their universe, aka the New 52, they added some characters from Wildstorm. One such character was known as Warblade, part of the Team Wildcats. I'd play the cartoon theme song, but, well, YouTube. Anyway, despite being a hero, they made him into a villain who led a team called the Ravagers, who would go around killing children unless they proved powerful enough to join their stupid team. And according to Wikipedia, the most reliable of sources, he was killed by Deathstroke. I imagine any of his fans are likely pissed off with this kind of treatment, even if he was brought back to life and made a proper hero by now. Which, honestly, I have no idea. And regardless, Axel isn't meant to be a sympathetic character, but more of one you can kind of empathize with. At least some justification for him when they bring him back. Though again, for the remake in anime only. Future games likely helped improve his character, especially since he would later try to save Lamia in a future game. Speaking of Lamia, she's another one of the characters who is central to the plot, introduced in the very first stage as she takes on DC troops to get closer to the ATX team. She's the one we spend the most time with as she spies on our heroes, learning from their struggles and developing her own identity. If you can't tell by the footage of her distorted speech pattern, she's an artificial human, created by Lemon to infiltrate the team. Not really spoilers since it's extremely obvious. Even Kyosuke is suspicious early on given how some info didn't make sense to him. And of course, because she's a cyborg, well, her emotions aren't quite on the same wavelength as everyone else's. For instance, when Bullet is reprimanded for not following orders and going against a certain jackass of a commander I will talk more about later, she will note how stupid that was to disobey a superior officer. This is in spite of him wanting to try and stop the fighting, trying to help the DC realize the true enemy are the alien forces. Yet she will express confusion when other officers seem to bend the rules, like when Kai lets Latuni and the others try to save her friends who are fighting in the DC. I can see why people will be more upset Axel's in the main star since her plot is really nothing we haven't seen before in other games. The emotionless cyborg with a soul is something seen all too common nowadays. Not that I hate Lamia, in fact she has some of the best theme songs and mechs in the game, and is still interesting to me, despite the fact her outfit has this thing. Seriously, what the hell is that little flap for? Also, her speech quirk, I found it more entertaining in the anime, mainly when she talks to Lee and...
依存はないな。
なかったりしちゃいますわ。
しちゃいます。
God, I love this stupid series. Latuni is another focus, revisiting the angle of the school once more as our old friends are being manipulated by a woman named Agila Setme, who used to manage the school and now works for DC. We get more details, like apparently there were drugs being pumped into the children to make them better pilots. More concerning, however, is how she can manipulate the memory of certain pilots. For example, the two other pilots sharing the spotlight with Latuni, Ardo and Ciola. Due to Ardo being a terrible pilot and working best when partnered with Ciola, he gets shot down by Latuni, yet miraculously survives and eventually joins her since he realizes, oh god, I've been played like a fiddle. Ciola is so distraught at the idea of Ardo being dead that she is constantly forced into trying to forget about him, using whatever kind of methods Agila and her team use. I'm assuming more drugs. I do appreciate Agila being more intimidating than Adler as a result of this. Adler was only threatening when he had the Valgian units, and even then, those turn berserk thanks to the Gaim system. Good luck surviving that kind of mess. Even in the anime, she feels scarier, especially when she managed to refine using the Gaim system in both versions. There's a lot of memory manipulation, even extending to Aya's family, though we'll save that for the spoiler section. As for the people who took Latuni in, Giotto and Garnet, they are the only characters not returning to combat since they are busy trying to raise a family. Though she does call them up to get advice and even try to help their living situation thanks to her friendship with Princess Shine, who also joins the battlefield after losing her country. Other stories, however, feel like there's no resolution to them, or just happen because the plot demands it. For example, Bullet and Kasuha get their own mechs, this tiger dragon machine that can switch between both animals, and is an ancient enemy to the Einst. Much like Psybuster, there are spirits who choose their pilots. While we do get some confrontations with the Einst and the awesome robot, the impact it has on the story feels minimal. I suppose you can make the argument for about a good number of units, but there's no real difference compared to saying having some company design this machine for the two, especially since Bull and Kasuha's personalities are linked with this upgrade, and nothing really changes between them save for Kasuha getting a tad bit braver. And we already had her resolve to fight in the war in Game 1, and in Game 2 she's already fighting in a Grungust. The only thing I think it was trying to add to it were the use of other machines like Psybuster, since more enemies and allies linked to magic would show up in future games. Speaking of Psybuster and Mazuki, he kind of feels just there. Not to say there isn't some enjoyable dialogue, like how he worked together with Ibis against one of the inspectors, but then a majority of his dialogue with Shu can be boiled down to this.
Yes, I killed your father. What is it with you women anyway?
And I don't really mind it, it's just nothing goes anywhere between him and Shu, and Mazuki already resolved to put his murder boner away to protect the world. Though Shu at least does a few important things, like helping to save Elzum at one point, or even just showing off how dangerous he is to the inspectors by demonstrating his superior control over gravity. Really, just stuff to remind us he is in the background and will become an even more devastating threat in future games. Hell, he hasn't even gotten the Neo Granzen yet. In the anime though, he does eventually help out the team, even taking down an inspector quite easily. While Lupina doesn't have too much going on this time, there is more focus on Daitetsu and Tetsuya, building up their relationship, and Daitetsu trying to get his officer in command of his own ship. Yet Tetsuya is always in conflict with a commander by the name of Lee. Oh boy, Lee. Lee is meant to be seen as a superior to Tetsuya, always placing ahead of him, and is also a massive asshat to everyone, even expecting them to die for him, viewing everyone with disdain ever since losing his family to Ingram during his betrayal stunt. Fun fact, the anime does feature Lee at times, even hating the idea of playing second fiddle to the Hakane. However, nothing comes of it, unlike in the games where, well, I'm pretty sure you can guess the path his character would go down. Although this is very minor, another relationship I kinda grew to like more was Leona and Tasuku, who at first didn't quite get the pairing given the limited time they had. While OG2 doesn't show me why they are a couple, it does at least show me how good they are, as there is one scene when Tasuku is hit really hard by Woda and Ymir. Given the intensity of the strike, it's assumed he is dead and Leona becomes distraught. Eventually, with some guidance from Excellen, she is able to properly help Tasuku by cooking well for a change, and Tasuku immediately accepts her food despite her fears of it tasting badly. It's not too much, but it's a lot better than the other scenes of the two, where Tasuku eyes other girls and she reprimands him. Then of course you have useless characters. And by useless I mean Kenneth Garrett, a commander who looks like a stereotypical drill sergeant and constantly antagonizes Kyosuke's team. He provides nothing beyond a twist and is really annoying. In a future game, he'd even be demoted due to his repeated failures, which, when combined with giving false info to teams and impeding their progress, makes me wonder how in the flying hell this guy came into a high position of power. Then I stare at real life and do nothing but cry myself to sleep. Granted, at least until I remember I can keep playing these clips. However, there's still more conflict going on in the regular Earth too. As I said before, the Neo DC might be the smallest threat, but they do align with the Shadow Mirrors at one point, making things worse for our heroes. Though unlike most of the other factions, there are legitimate good people who do eventually realize when a threat is way too big for only them to handle. At the same time, there is one certain evildoer seeking to muck things up just for fun, Archibald Grims, another major antagonist for the game. Remember in the last game how Rai hated his brother regarding the Elpis incident, the one that killed his sister-in-law and the colonies nearly gassed? While the resolution to it felt kinda weak, the writers felt the need to bring in the man who caused the incident, Archibald Grims, who even reveals that the EFA were the ones to hire him, all to suppress the will of the Space Noids. This is also not further help with people like Keith, and another new character, Brian Grassman. Wait, he looks like Judas Traveler from the Spider-Man Clone Saga. Screw it, I'm calling him that for the rest of the review. So anyway, Judas Traveler is planning to overthrow the current government, believing the Aegis plan to be worthless, and that they should just wipe out the alien invaders. So trust in the EFA would likely be worsened. This also doesn't help with their arms supplier, one who was funding both sides of the armies, a woman by the name of Mitsuko Isarugi, who was also present in the previous game, though more in the background. It's the same kind of situation here, though she later confronts a man by the name of Niphal, again from the first game, who has ties to the aliens, and she wishes to do business with them. All of this stuff is meant to build up future games where the government will continue to screw up magnificently.
So preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Other characters have either minor roles yet do their best to stand out, like Ibis Douglas trying to prove herself worthy of piloting a certain machine to explore space, despite the fact that her skills are terrible. Or there is stuff for the old pilots like Sanger Zonfeld, who must confront one of the Shadow Mirrors who fights like him quite eerily. Fans of Alpha Gaiden will likely know what's up immediately, as another threat to join them are the Machine Children. Of all the factions though, the Machine Children are the least developed, though don't come out of left field. They were implied to be created in the first game, but weren't ready for the Arrowgators, so the developers went into sleep hibernation until they were ready. Though instead of helping everyone against the Inspectors, one of the people involved wanted to take over the world, so he plans to do that instead. Speaking of the Inspectors, they're another main villain faction, hinted to have ties to the Balmerians and presenting technology down to Earth. They sometimes flip-flop between two modes, being very threatening, one machine even looking like a mechanical dragon, and all members are able to put the gang on the back foot on multiple occasions. On the other hand, they can also be quite silly, which makes me love them even more. There's not too much to say about them beyond the stuff I have in the spoiler section. They are, however, the embodiment of the villains often seen in Super Robot Wars, providing interesting fights and force some great upgraded mech scenes, and overall just fun to have around. Plus their main purpose is to continue to hint at there being multiple alien forces ready to take the fight to Earth, thus giving the material needed for future stories. Really, the only major problem I have with the story, as you might expect, is how there is a lot of stuff to try and digest, not made easier when some of the story revolving around the Einst can be a bit difficult to understand. Hell, the characters themselves are complaining that their dialogue is too hard to read. Plus some character motivations are questionable, though again, I have to go into spoilers regarding those. And plus there is the issue that there are a lot of characters. Some are going to be left on the back burner, unfortunately. But overall, despite some issues, I still like the plot in this one and how most of the characters are handled. It's a step up from the first game, not just in what they do with the new players, but in how past characters are evolving their relationships, some even trying to find out who they really are and what they want beyond stopping the bad guys. As for the anime, I recommend you wait until finishing the second game before watching this. I did have a good time, though only because I had prior knowledge of the game's events, so I could keep track of the condensed story. Also, kinda goes without saying, but please don't watch this in a public place. The series has stuff in it, and people will question you. Unless you don't care, in which case go for it. Still, I enjoyed myself, and it was even able to improve on some of the problems I had with the GBA game. Now then, I believe I said I would be talking more about the characters after last time, so let's head into some spoilers right now. This is what I would normally say, but due to there being so many characters, so many different plot lines happening, I'm left with no choice but to split this video into two. Yeah, the spoiler section got that long, ready to surpass all of my videos in fact. Man, wouldn't it be funny if that 30th anniversary game currently being teased was a collection of the OG games, making this review series pointless? I'll at least know what the hell to do when reviewing this series again. Then I can follow Moon Dwellers much easier. Anyway, I'm the smartest moron, and I'll see you next time with some spoilers.